But I'm going to start, if that's okay.
It's lovely. Thank you.
Sangye chodang soki chonam la janju bardu dagni kabsu chi dagi chonyen gi pe sonam gi drola pencher sangye drupar shog sangye chodang
Chodam
soki
soke
chonam la
chodam la
janju
janju
bardu
badu dagni
kapsu
kapsuchi.
dagi chonyen gi pe sonam gi drola pencher sangye drupar shog sangye chodang soki chonam la janju bardu dagni kabsu chi dagi chonyen gi pe sonam gi drola pencher sangye drupar shog. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teachings, like a star, an optical illusion, or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop, or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of light, or a cloud. So should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemies, our harmful deeds, and may beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. The Heart of Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan was dwelling on Massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perfection. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also of empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are empty, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is also no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element, no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and the path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All of the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awakened in the unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. And the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Alkitsvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasvata, Arya Alkitsvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. Praise to Manjushri. Homage to my guru and protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by the delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You, whose dragon thunder, like proclamation of the Dharma, arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever it sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance, you, whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapsa Nat Di. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and texts that explain them. Jaji Poki Jugshimi Tog Tram Ri Robling Ji Ni De Gan Pati Sangye Jing Du Mi Te Uari Roku Nam Dag Jing La Cho Par Shog. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds, for I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami.
Thank you very much. So we'll just spend a few moments composing our minds, particularly withdrawing from the hustle bustle of our daily affairs, just settling on the spot where we currently are. Letting go of any tensions or tightness or tiredness with the out-breath. Then with the in-breath, inhale radiant light, the essence of enlightened Buddha, mind and body. This permeates into our body down to the most subtle atomic level. but also permeates our mind as vast as space. Now we establish a very pure motivation for the time we're going to spend together. Just relishing this opportunity to practice with the support of our friends towards the most extraordinary Bodhisattva goals that Shantideva is so vividly and persuasively laying out. So feel that we're going to implement these instructions, not for our own purposes, but for the purposes of limitless suffering mother sentient beings. So thank you very much. I actually raised a question with one of my teachers on Tuesday night, because I think, like most of us, we're very impacted by the dreadful events that are occurring in the world. And in Australia, we have a SBS, which is a government-run television station, which is particularly dedicated to what we might call hard news, rather than someone losing their dog at a shopping centre on Sunday and coming back 4 days later, which occupies some of the more commercial news services. It deals with the nitty-gritty of the war, and particularly the awful scenes that we're seeing playing out, particularly in Gaza at the moment. And anyway, I asked a question how we might respond to the weight of these particular events in terms of our practice. And Geshe Jumper Geltsen answered by saying that as trainee bodhisattvas, our position is very, very unique, because we're not investing in the ways of the world. We're trying to cut through them in a way that's going to enable us to give rise to true happiness, and also to share the conditions for true happiness with others. Whereas the way of the world, and this is precisely Shantideva's point, is that it's focused on I, me, my needs, my people, my religion, my rights, and so forth, even to the extent of feeling that it's legitimate or justifiable to deny or eliminate even the lives of others. So he quoted in a rather delightful way Milarepa, who said, "The world thinks I am mad, but I, Milarepa, think the world is mad." So in declaring that the world is mad, we're not wiping everyone off as a bad idea or a bad joke. To the contrary. But what we're trying to say is, if we really try to extricate a stable meaning from the turmoil of these activities in the world, we're not going to be able to find it, because they're predicated on self-cherishing. And that's a deluded way of approaching reality. So for as long as self-cherishing is in place, we're going to be effectively blocked from developing bodhicitta, and we're going to be effectively blocked from reaching out to benefit others in a really, really dynamic and beneficial way. So I just thought to preface today with that, because I've also been very conscious of the demonstrations on the American campuses, and how the what we might call the moral vision, or even the moral clarity of vision that's been exhibited by those young students, is being held down by certain political opponents as somehow being inappropriate and unjustified. And so that's really quite extraordinary, because they're arguing for human rights, the respect for human rights, and they apply to everyone. So you can see here how fraught it is to navigate our world from a moral viewpoint. So this isn't unrelated to our topic today, because Shantideva is going to bring this right back to home. How can we begin to operate in a sound, stable, ethical manner that is absolutely beneficial? So the topic is the practice of guarding the mind with mindfulness and introspection. And this topic follows logically from our immediate recent discussion on the necessity of applying mindfulness and introspection yoked together. So Shantideva is now going to teach us how to do that in terms of our navigation of lived circumstances, lived experiences, and in very particular detail. So the emphasis is shifting on the manner of guarding our own mind. And in this way, we'll also gain the tools to guard our speech and our bodies. In particular, Shantideva is now dealing with how we are to establish and maintain an ethical stance in the specific terms of the morality of restraint. It would be appropriate to say here that Shantideva is zeroing upon what we might call the psychological dimensions of restraint. What is restraint in terms of our practice? And he's going to show very quickly that it's not a matter of obeying some exterior code of ethics, but it's got to do with the way we take responsibility for our own mind and its mind generation of various impulses and thoughts which lead to actions. So to better organize this material, Gyaltsabje proposes 3 subheadings, and they are training the mind in the morality of restraint, training the mind in the morality of accumulating virtue, and training the mind in the morality that accomplishes the welfare of others. These 3. You'll recognize immediately that they are the same as found in the presentation of ethics in the classic Lam Rim presentation. The morality of restraint from misdeeds, the morality of accumulating virtuous dharma, and the morality of working for the sake of sentient beings. However, following Shantideva's own lead, Gyaltsabje immediately focus upon the first, the morality of restraint, which is further subdivided into 2, striving to purify the actions of the 3 doors and protecting the 3 doors from degeneration. 3 doors referring to body, speech, and mind. Striving to purify the action of the 3 doors, the first of these 2 is now itself broken down into 3, investigating the actions of body and speech, investigating the actions of the mind, and explaining the permitted and forbidden actions. This first, investigating the actions of body and speech, is again subdivided now into 4. Investigating the motivations before a physical action, advice relating to looking, and so forth, relating this advice to looking to other actions, and investigating the action of abiding. So you can really appreciate here not just Gyaltsabje's meticulous clarification of how we must proceed to guard the mind with mindfulness and alertness, but also Shantideva's own scrupulously precise methodology, as reflected in the highly organized sequencing of his verses. There is always a powerful purpose underlying this arrangement. If we are to tune in to this deep structure, one that might not be immediately apparent on the surface level of the text, we'll be able to appreciate just how it is that we are ourselves to proceed, to practice morality in a manner that is unconfused and comprehensive. For example, to investigate the motivation obviously comes first, as it is a part of a causal chain leading to actions of body, speech, and further actions of mind for that matter. It determines the performative flow of our spiritual activities and worldly activities, as well as the nature of the deed that will follow. That is, motivation's outcome itself, its fruit, as it were. So it's really, really important here to think about the way in which a motivation leads causally to the production of a particular kind of outcome. This is crucial. It's why His Holiness talks about the law of cause and effect, dependent arising, as being so crucial to understanding these topics. The effect makes sense in terms of the cause, and the cause makes sense in terms of the effect. We need to understand very clearly how these two cannot be separated and seen to exist in and of themselves. So because of this interdependency, we're enmeshed creatively, as it happens, in a whole world of possible activities, and motivation is a key one. So it importantly indicates the link between motivation and consequences, thereby making sense of the law of cause and effect. But more importantly still, perhaps, it posits the mind, the motivational and thus initiating mind, in this case, as the very base of this operation. And moreover, it proposes that our morality must proceed precisely from this point. If we leave motivation out of the picture, we'll have no means of any sensible moral practice or existence, for that matter. So the reason's obvious. If we don't identify and watch the beginning, the motivation in this case, then what chance is there to determine, let alone creatively control, the unfolding trajectory of the action that will spring from this motivational point? Even sports people know this. This is why their coaches put them through often rigorous motivation sessions. They're called motivation sessions, even minutes before the game. And this is why Geshe Doga suggests that this presentation of learning to observe our motivation is critical to a beginner's practice. He's not putting down beginners here because we're training as beginning bodhisattvas. We're really genuinely trying to become bodhisattvas. This practice is absolutely crucial from the very start. In Geshe Doga's words, I quote, "This part of the presentation is very suitable for beginners, as they'll find it systematic and very logical. They are able, beginners, to relate to this explanation very well, because it relates to normal, everyday activities. Investigating the motivation before a physical action relates to the fact that the mind is paramount to whatever actions we engage in. The mind is the forerunner. It precedes all physical and verbal activities. Whether we conduct a positive physical activity or whether it harms others depends on our motivation prior to that action. Likewise, with the speech that we utter, whether it is positive and beneficial or harmful and negative, it is also dependent on the motivation that precedes the speech. This presentation, referring to Shantideva's verses, is also dependent. Shows how the mind is the forerunner of all activities. So I'll just quote again, the mind is the forerunner of all activities. This means not some activities, it means all. And it also means that we have potential effective control over our minds. Then the scope of succeeding maintaining our morality will then be understood as inseparable from training our mind itself. So this is a notion already reflected in Shantideva's famous verse of the mind of patience, quelling all disturbances in a manner that is like covering the whole surface of the earth with the leather, so that we will not be punctured by the thorns, no matter where we go or what terrain we find ourselves in. We don't have to bend the world into accord with our situation. This is getting back to that earlier question I raised about how we respond to the wars in the world at the moment. We don't have to stop all the wars in order to do our practice. What we have to stop is our capacity to generate war-like thinking, for example, within our own mind, and then act from that. For example, this might involve, as we see in some fundamental ideologies that play in the world today, seeking to eliminate certain objects. Sadly, these objects might even be people, deemed to violate the ideological stance or ethical code being held by those people. So the Buddhist approach is that we have to work directly with the contents and operations of our own mind and take full responsibility for that. Not to say that's all we do, but we have to be there at the start. And this is the easiest place to start, as Geshe Doga's pointing out. And it's easier to begin to look at our ways of generating physical and verbal activities than it is to observe the way the mind generates activities about the mind itself. In other words, it's a bit, not cruder, but we've got a little bit of scope there to move around. What is impelling us to act physically in a particular way? If we can seize that, we then have a chance of beginning to control the mind again that might be behind that scenography of that action. We simply restrain from that action. That's something we can do, even if we can't restrain from the thought impelling that action. So by stopping the action, we effectively circumvent the thought. So you see here, it's a different way of working with things, and it's very, very palpable and very achievable to start doing that straight away. So the mind makes the difference. The mind makes all the difference. So again, our current subheading, investigating the motivation before a physical action. Verse 34, Shantideva, when, just as I am about to act, I see that my mind is tainted with defilement, at such a time I should remain immovable, like a piece of wood. In approaching this verse, we must, I think, observe the chronology indicated. When is announcing this? When? Just as I am about to act. This is incredibly specific. It's indicating that we're zeroing in upon that moment when the motivation is being generated at an incipient level, just as it's coming into being, just then. It's very, very, very precise. Sonam Senmo says, at the outset, which is equivalent to bachelor's just when I'm about to, means before one engages in an activity. So this again is capturing what's being talked about here. Just before we act, not in the first moments of the act, but just before we execute the act. We have to train ourselves to become aware at that moment. In those circumstances, all too frequent perhaps, in which we identify that our mind is tainted with defilement, echoing the words in Shantideva's verse, meaning a delusion or an afflictive emotion is already in play and is building to a point that will impel us irresistibly to formulate an action, one that will be negatively destructive in this case, means that we need to take decisive action right there. This is because, as Sonam Senmo says, a mind like this with some fault, which is equivalent to bachelor's mind tainted with defilement, means wanting to engage in negative actions. Isn't that amazing? The motivation, because it's defiled, wants us to engage in a negative action. That's its trajectory. That is why it is defiled. We have to recognize that. So it's really sobering to stop and consider for a moment this reference to wanting to engage in negative physical activities. For this is what these particular mental afflictions are driving us towards executing. So I think there's a real sense here in a possible disjunct between our better self and our deluded impulses, because of course we don't want to hurt our lovely neighbour. But if we generate a deluded mind because we're having an altercation about the location of a rebuilt property fence line, then we have all sorts of scope to perform actions that would shock us in the quieter moments when we stop to think about it. So this is the wanting aspect. It's almost as though we're personifying the delusions and giving them full autonomy. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we had an earlier verse from Shantideva that said, how come the delusions which don't have arms and legs get to dominate us? It's crazy. That is crazy. Yet we do, and they do. So who and what is wanting is not our own better judgment or even our own better or wiser self, but it is the internal impetus or power of the ripening affliction itself. The point here is that if we're to intrude upon its trajectory, its maturation pathway, it is best to step in at this earliest stage. And I've made this point frequently in recent weeks. For example, we might, with mindfulness, feel the sudden eruption of nervous tension coincident with the initial inklings of what is to become a fully awakened or fully fledged mind of anger, or a heavy, bloated feeling of inordinate pride. Becoming aware of this with discriminating alertness and determining the perilous nature of this situation in which we find ourselves, we immediately call upon ourselves to circumvent, curtail, nip in the bud pending events. But because it's exceedingly difficult to do so, as it is the nature of the afflictions that they distort and overwhelm our mind, they effectively take control of it. And they also blur our vision, like pouring heavy, obscuring ink into water. And in particular, they impair our capacity to judge, our capacity to wisely and calmly think things through. So Shantideva offers this amazing instruction, and it's an amazingly simple instruction. What we're to do is to immediately make our mind stable and steady, as though it was now a piece of wood. So that analogy needs to be unfolded a little. The Tibetan word xing refers not just to wood, but to trees. So the analogy here, according to the commentaries, is to a mighty tree that is immovable in the wind. As Kunsang Pelden says, our minds should be unshakable, and we should not allow them to fall under the influence of the negative thoughts. Involved, as such thoughts are with the objects of the senses, we should act in accordance with the proverb, clean the lamp while it is still warm, and club the pig right on its snout. This was the verse that I quoted last week in relation to another context. He continues, as soon as bad thoughts arise, we must beat them down without delay. And Gaudsabje's commentary on this verse, before engaging in any physical action, such as walking, investigate this mind of yours to see whether the motivation for the action is flawed or not. In case a flawed motivation has arisen, then, while remembering the antidote against the afflictions, remain steady like wood and not be moved by the motivation. This is how the analogy is working. We stand there like that mighty tree, and it's immovable under the gusts of force that are coming from the incipient emergence of that deluded mind. We refuse absolutely to budge even one iota by yielding to the momentum of that delusion. We totally refuse to go there. So Geshe Doga indicates that not being moved by the motivation also involves taking a remedial step. He says, when one notices that one's motivation is tainted and applies the antidote to the afflictions, then one will be able to remain steady and not be moved by that tainted motivation, superstitious thoughts, and so forth. So the mind itself remains steady and not moved by the faulty motivations of the afflictions. You can see here that we can also swing in an antidote at that moment. In this case, we can understand the antidote as a manifestation of the very determination to remain steady, not to get involved in that affliction. It's natural that we'll consider anatta. No, I won't hate you. I'll love you instead. Right at that moment, we move the mind in that way. So you can see here that the antidote is the essence of remaining steady, impervious to the buffeting gusts of the swirling afflictions. Geshe-Doga relates this situation back to our domestic setting. He says, coming back to the main point, our motivation is of paramount importance. Whatever activity we engage in, we need to first check our motivation. Those of you who live with a partner know from experience how, if you do not check your state of mind and allow negative states of mind, such as anger, to become prevalent, you can easily engage in inappropriate gestures and behaviors that can upset your partner. Behaving in this way will not be received very well, even by someone who is close to you. We see so many examples of the complications, harm, and hostility that can arise as a result of not having paid attention to one's state of mind prior to engaging in the activities that affect your companion. Geshe-Doga continues, if you take this advice to heart and really pay attention to your state of mind, then when you notice your anger arising, having contemplated the faults of anger, it's referring to having contemplated the faults of anger elsewhere at other times, so we're prepared, you will know that it is not a really suitable state of mind with which to interact with others. By virtue of recognizing that, you'll be able to prevent yourselves from mishaps and harming others. This is the practical approach to protecting yourselves. Considered in Western psychological terms, I'm wondering whether this strategy of involving immovability, not being swayed by disturbing forces, is not dissimilar to what has come to be known as mindfulness in the sort of scientific context, meaning not to seek to follow the disturbing thoughts, not to oppose them, but simply and calmly to be aware of them in a lucid, impartial way. In this way, they lose their steam, their impetus, and die away. So these techniques are also taught in Buddhism, particularly in the context of Mahamudra meditation, where one observes the mind arising and lets it drop away of its own momentum. But the crucial point is we do that observation without proceeding to follow the impulse of the action. Because the moment we step over that threshold, we're in danger, and we endanger others potentially. It's just interesting, in Australia at the moment, we're having a very big national debate about gendered violence and namely violence against women, and something well over 70% of women who are murdered by a domestic partner. This is a shocking thing to consider. And everyone's trying to find answers. And there are masculinity workshops being developed, and they're having limited success, and they're not getting adequately funded to try to defuse particular men who have already been charged with domestic violence in order that they might not become more severe or continuing perpetrators. And I'm just wondering to what extent some of these techniques could be brought into play in these workshops. They're not being talked about, but they should be, because they're a way of dealing with anger, for example, whether it's misogynistically inflected or not. It's anger, and its intent is to harm another person. So take a step back, take another step back, and start training the self to work at that level. So I just raise that as an interesting thought. So the stress is on the object out there all the time, but Shantideva's swinging that scenario backwards, folding it in outside inwards and inside outwards, if you like, and saying that we work with the outside by working with the inside. And by working with the inside, we can then relate differently to the world, and therefore effectively modulating the outside in that way. So this idea of mindfulness appears to be the one that's sort of Western therapeutic mindfulness seems to be the interpretation given by Pema Chodron in her commentary on this important verse. And she writes, when we sit down in meditation, we can check our state of mind to see what's going on. If we see dullness or wildness, instead of fueling it with our thoughts, we simply stay awake to whatever is happening without condemning or succumbing to it. This brings a sense of workability to our practice and makes us feel more self-possessed, end of quote. But as we can see from both Gyaltsen Sabje and Geshe Doga's commentary, it is apparent that this instruction is to be directly applied to all situations, including those not just conducted on our meditation cushion. What I'm getting at here is if we do train in this sort of impartiality on our meditation cushion, the aim is to be able to carry it outside with us as we engage in the world. So when we consider that by training ourselves in such an impartiality, this deliberately unwavering equilibrium while in meditation, we've achieved in meditation, will stand a better chance of handling situations more successfully in the world at large, particularly, and I emphasize, particularly in those in which we're preparing to engage in a physical activity, such as going for a walk, which is Gyaltsen Sabje's example, but dare I mention, when we're preparing to hit somebody. I mentioned physical activities here because this is the emphasis of Shantideva's verse, according to the general heading, investigating the actions of body and speech, which we're still under. According to Gyaltsen Sabje's outline, the advice relating to looking and so forth, our next topic has 4 subdivisions. The general conduct of looking with the eyes, how to look when tired, how to act when another person comes close, and how to act when one rests. I find this zeroing in upon the act of looking absolutely fascinating, because having come from a sort of university background and studying, amongst other things, sexual politics, there was great emphasis put on the notion of the gaze and the gendered gaze, how we actually determine our reality through the way in which we inform our acts of looking. So I just mentioned that. I think Shantideva is getting into very similar territory here. So the general way of looking is pertinent, or is discussed in verse 35. Never should I look around distractedly for no purpose. With a resolute mind, I should always keep my eyes downward cast. As Pema Chodron notes, we have noticed monks and nuns behaving in this way as they walk around. And the purpose, she says, this is mindfulness practice in action, lowering the gaze and making no eye contact. It was probably a standard instruction for the monks at Landa. The idea is to lessen distractions and heighten awareness of habitual tendencies. And she adds, it can be helpful to create certain times to practice mindfulness in this very undistracted way, being alert to any tendency to get too tight or too loose. End of quote. So you might be wondering, what does this all have to do with navigating our social world? Say a business or a family meeting requiring eye contact. We can't simply go around looking down. We have to engage. Does this dismiss the above advice by Shantideva as somehow meaningless and unworkable? I don't think so, because what Shantideva is getting at is that we are training in being able to look at things in an impartial, clear-sighted way, not being swayed by the force of the afflictions. For example, we don't look at things in a way that will inflame our passions, our anger, desires, and so forth. So looking here is a vital agency that we place at the hands of the delusions to operate our vision. What if we pull back from that and take responsibility for how the eyes are working, how vision is working? We're just using vision here. It can be in any of the senses. So we must learn to see in a calm and steady manner, one that's fully aware of the object before us and at the same time is fully aware of our own state of mind accompanying that act of looking. And this is especially the case when our mind is giving rise to various agitations and cravings. Kunzang Peldon's approach to the meaning supports this more general reading just given. He says, Shantideva goes on to say that he'll never allow his gaze to wander vacantly around. In other words, he'll never look at things that are futile or are not in harmony with the Dharma. He will not pretend to be other than he is. He will not create a facade for others to see. And he then relates this to meditational experience and training together with its wider application. He says, being convinced of the principle of adopting and rejecting and of the ultimate nature of phenomena, I'll substitute pronouns here, she will look with a lowered gaze and half-opened eyes, fixed upon a point past the tip of her nose at a distance of about a yoke's length. For it is said, whatever thoughts of craving, aversion, and so on arise in the mind, the eyes are drawn towards the associated object, and the defilements themselves can be visibly discerned in the eye's expression. Therefore, it is consequently not good to look around with a distracted gaze. Very, very interesting quote. So the distracted gaze in this case would mean allowing one's mind, especially through the doorway of vision, to chase objects that would support and feed the afflictions. Additionally, one doesn't idly distract oneself visually with what Kunzang Pelden calls futile looking. Very interesting, isn't it? Futile looking. Referring to viewing with no express purpose whatsoever. Because the express purpose of looking is to engage in Dharma practice. We swing our operation of our senses into that and then work from there. This is the crucial point. So this means, in other words, that every single moment of a bodhisattva's gaze is purposeful and intent on benefiting others. Therefore, even to come into the field of vision of a bodhisattva or a Buddha is itself a very remarkable and special thing. Following this logic, for a traditional Tibetan, even glimpsing from a distance His Holiness the Dalai Lama in a procession would be the highlight of that nomad's entire life. Just to see His Holiness the Dalai Lama in the distance just once becomes the pinnacle of one's life. And they would relate that story with tones of wonderment to their children. And to become an object of a Buddha's stare, just imagine life could never be the same again. And we do hear these stories of, you might have your own, of peering into His Holiness the Dalai Lama's eyes and His Holiness returning that gaze. And I've heard people relate the way in which they felt themselves emptying out and experiencing this state that was inexpressibly peaceful and amazing at that moment. So reading the situation, what I'm getting at here is that even in common parlance, we talk about eyes are the mirror of the soul. There's this intimate relationship between eyes and impulse, isn't there? If we can see things without aggravating and triggering the delusions, then our eyes will themselves be calm. So we're reading back the physiology here. If our mind is calm, we see things in a calm way, and as a consequence, our eyes are calm. Not darting around, not agitated. Therefore, to look at the face of someone with a subdued mind brings harmony and peace to our own mind. Dog owners will know this is true of their treasured pets. They return our gaze with utter candour and trust. This is the foundation of an intimate rapport that is hard to express in words. So these are all sort of resonances that are coming out of this idea of looking. It's really very special to start to consider. The first two lines of verse 36 correspond to the next subheading, how to look when tired. And so verse 36a-b say, but in order to relax the mind, for a short while, I should look around. So the instruction here acknowledges the power of rest. If we put too much focus on looking, we might develop a wind disease or a blinding headache. So it's therefore skillful as practitioners to know how also to loosen our gaze when necessary, just to let it be. And I thought of the analogy of a clenched fist. If we're trying too hard to see something or see things properly or whatever it is, we get tighter and tighter and tighter, and that creates problems. So just simply let go. Don't attempt, in other words, to perceive any one thing in special detail or even to focus at all. And this helps our wind energy redistribute itself through our body system, thereby relieving tension. The last two lines of verse 36 and the first two lines of verse 37 fall under the subheading, how to act when another person comes close. And they read, and if someone appears in my field of vision, I should look at him and say, welcome. Having examined both ahead and behind, I should proceed to either come or go. Regarding the first, learning to say welcome to those whom we visually encounter is a very, very practical precept. So what Geshe-Daigo was referring to as a beginner's practice. This is something we can definitely start doing now. And it's one that carries particular weight in terms of our Bodhisattva training. We can either read it literally to mean that we should actually verbally greet everyone we encounter, but on a more subtle and less literal level, and perhaps an even more important one, it means that our eyes will greet that person with loving kindness and delight. This is a sign that the Bodhisattva or the Bodhisattva trainee has at least reached a point of realizing that each and every sentient being is exactly the same in wanting happiness and freedom from suffering. Our vision, in other words, is not made, not allowed to engage in partisan behavior, perniciously dividing each encountered person into value systems, more or less worthy, friend, enemy, and stranger, or more subtly, into categories where some are seen more worthy of our bodhisattva regard and activities than others. Why? Because we have not realized the equality of self and others. If we do engage in that, it means that we haven't realized the fundamental equality of self and others, which is the foundation of where we proceed or must proceed if we wish to develop bodhicitta using the method of exchanging self and others according to Shantideva's presentation in the very famous 8th chapter. There in verse 90, Shantideva says, first of all, I should make an effort to meditate upon the equality of self and others. I should protect all beings as I do myself, because we are all equal in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. So returning to the earlier point, it is an important ethical practice to greet people in a warm and welcoming way. That's ethics at work. We're using our eyes as ambassadors in this, because someone who is shy or nervous will attempt to read our gaze to determine whether or not they are welcome as they approach us. Don't they? We're constantly doing this, even if it's at a subconscious level. We're reading the intention of others through the eyes. And again, this is something perfectly apparent in animals. Even this is sort of scientifically determined that even a fluctuation in the size of our iris can be ascertained by, say, a dog as an indication of impending attack or embracing love. They know. If they know, why don't we know? Why don't we get on board and start to really, really work carefully with our organ of sight in this way. In short, as Geshe Doga stresses, Shantideva is asking us to become conscious of and responsible for our field of vision. It is an arena into which beings, both newcomers and those who are thoroughly familiar, should equally feel warmly received and warmly welcome. So I just know from my art gallery days, the kind of politics that go on at a gallery opening are just extraordinary, because everyone's jockeying for ascendancy in various ways. So they're trying, literally, listen to the language, trying to catch the eye of the National Gallery director across a crowded room, because they want to be noticed by the gallery director, because it might indeed serve as an opportunity to be invited to have a retrospective solo exhibition in 4 years' time with government funding. And so the room is just this lattice of glaring, clashing looks as everyone's trying to maneuver. I've often gone to gallery openings just to be with my friends, and I'll be in the middle of having a warm conversation when I notice my friends facing me, eyes sliding sideways over my shoulder as they notice someone of importance, and then their body language begins to shift away, and in the next moment they're gone, even mid-sentence, even mid-word. So these are kind of fun examples, aren't they? These dynamics we're engaging in all the time. We walk into a crowded party and we indicate who we want to be with and who we don't want to be with using these sorts of mechanisms. So if our vision in and of itself always says welcome, that is because we've trained the mind in at least seeing the equality of self and others. On that basis, we can equally welcome everyone we see spontaneously in the same way that we welcome ourselves, we would welcome ourselves. So Gyaltsabje's commentary on these particular lines says, if someone comes into one's field of vision while we have our eyes downcast, once they are in front of us, we smile at them and say, how good you came. Also, while walking along a path, one needs to repeatedly look around in the 4 directions to see whether there are dangers or not. So, regarding the second part of 37AB, it says, having examined both ahead and behind, I should proceed to either come or go. Clearly, we're not to become so engrossed in our attempted Bodhisattva training that we fail to estimate or visually determine whether or not we are walking into danger. This is the point being made here. This might be physical hazards, such as walking off the edge of a cliff because we haven't been looking, or social hazards, such as unexpectedly encountering bandits who suddenly leap out at us behind rocks on a lowly mountain pass. Or it might be an assailant who suddenly appears from behind a tree as we take an evening walk in our own urban environment. So we're trying to be practical here. Shantideva is saying, be practical. Generate warm welcome thoughts and love, and have a beautiful gaze that is welcoming people. But this doesn't mean that we shouldn't be also able to ascertain whether or not there's circumstances that need to be make us cautious because they're dangerous. So this is because, from a Bodhisattva's point of view, in taking the case of the bandits, the karma of killing is very grievous, and as noted elsewhere, the killing of a bodhisattva even more so. So from a bodhisattva's perspective, it's necessary to be observant when someone's going to injure them, because even from, or especially from their perspective, it's going to result in enormous negative karma. So because of our love for them, we try to defuse the situation. So the decision to determine whether it is wise to come or go, advance or retreat, in other words, is immensely practical. It's immensely sane advice. Geshe-do gives the example of car drivers. They must certainly engage in this kind of discretion, whether to come or go, whether to advance or reverse, if they're not to injure other drivers, let alone the passengers in their car. So Shantideva now opens this out by relating it to other actions, which is the heading, main heading. And it's referring to 38 and third and fourth lines. Being aware of the necessity for such mindful alertness, I should behave like this in all situations. So Shantideva is extrapolating now out from the example of looking. The meaning is, the purpose is obvious. The example of appropriately seeing or looking or viewing to cover not just the situations involving the domination of other sensory consciousnesses, isn't just involving situations involving the other sensory consciousnesses, such as hearing, tasting, touching, and so forth. But it's referring to all situations, especially those involving our body and speech. Gyaltsabje's gloss renders this very clearly. He says, having understood the need for the benefit of self and others, act like this with all your physical and verbal actions. Not just some, all your physical and verbal actions. Geshe-do's comment, in summary, whether one's actions, whether physical or verbal, one needs to first check their purpose, whether they will benefit oneself or others, and then if, big if there is a benefit, to engage in those actions. End of quote. So the crux here is that our actions of body and speech should be guided, meaning should be motivated by our bodhisattva, our bodhicitta intention. All the instructions and advice we have just been given make perfect sense when viewed through this universal and universalizing perspective of the bodhisattva. One that puts everything, especially self and other, into its proper focus. So I can't emphasize that enough. If we keep trying to re-anchor our ordinary afflicted self in these scenarios in order to practice, we're going to fall over or become exhausted. It's not going to work so well. But if we keep reminding ourselves that what we're attempting to do is something very special, very extraordinary, very precious, then even to be able to perform the smallest, tiniest little act of generosity, for example, based on that kind of motivation, is a wondrous thing. We should be able to applaud it, not in a vainglorious way, but to be absolutely delighted that maybe for the first time in 100,000 actions, we've done something really beautiful, something really spiritual, something really meaningful. So everything falls into its place. If we train ourselves in this expansive way of thinking, we'll find that the task of navigating what is so often very complex and even perplexing experience will suddenly become much simpler. Yet at the same time, somehow exquisitely more nuanced and refined. So I'm saying two things at once here. This bodhicitta attitude makes things simpler because it jettisons all the machinations of the egotistical attitude, with all its complications and neuroses, out the window. But at the same time, the bodhicitta attitude enables us to look at reality face to face clearly, because we're not having to build a kind of a bulwark against experience anymore. We're able to see what's there. This is because our bodhicitta attitude, considered in both conventional and ultimate terms, will effectively undermine our self-cherishing and our self-grasping. These are the problems. In the process, our capacity to give rise to the afflictive emotions will naturally decrease while we move towards uprooting their imprints from our mind stream and thus ensuring our future success. Not future success, something we're going to hold on to as mine, but we need to be concerned about our future success if we're genuinely committed to following the Bodhisattva's path, because we want to proceed. We want to be effective, taking one step after the other. So this is the profound magic or miracle of the Bodhisattva's way of life, this ability to work on these two things, self-grasping and self-cherishing, together. So the next heading is investigating the action of abiding. And this is the fourth and final subdivision of the first investigation concerning the actions of body and speech. And it pertains to verse 39, which reads, "Once having prepared for an action with the thought, my body will remain in such a way, then periodically I should look to see how the body is being maintained." Gyaltsabje's commentary: after having the thought, I shall remain in this position, this may be a meditation posture, for example, stop the actions of the body and place it for the time being in the planned position, i.e. the meditation posture. Stop all the other actions. Look in the explained way and act always without faults. End of quote. So we might refer to this as utilizing mindfulness and alertness to assess and maintain our intended deportment. Except that here the emphasis in deportment isn't on physical vanity, having a good posture, etc., but rather on how our moral deportment is seamlessly extended to our bodily behavior. Are we indeed physically engaging as we mentally intended? We could develop that point, but unless we've got this capacity to get our body to sit and do what we want it to do, or stand and do what we want it to do, we're not going to be able to have any capacity to carry out any ethical engagement in the world successfully in a reliable fashion, because we can't predict what we're actually going to do. Quite clear. So we train to learn to sit in our intended posture and to stand up when we plan to stand up. This is the kind of carefulness that Shantideva was asking us to take in terms of our bodily deportment. We now move to the second form of morality, training in the morality of accumulating virtue. And this has two subheadings: fastening the mind to the virtuous object, and secondly, analyze whether it is singly pointed, focused on virtue or not. So verse 40 is explaining fastening the mind to a virtuous object, and it reads, "With utmost effort I should check to see that the crazed elephant of my mind is not wandering off, but is bound to the great pillar of thinking about Dharma." This is one of these wonderful verses of Shantideva where everything we need to know is encapsulated in a single memorable verse. The meaning here is obvious. Because it is our crazed elephant mind is so habitually allowed to wander off, chasing after this or that sense object according to appetitive whim, and thus without a single thought for others, let alone their welfare, that we need to swing the situation around by harnessing and fastening our mind to virtuous objects, tethering it, in other words, to the great pillar of thinking about Dharma. This is wonderful, this image. To think about Dharma in the middle of walking is to tether our mind to the post of Dharma. And therefore, we are connected in a very powerful and stable manner to contact with a virtuous object, even in the midst of everything going on around us. Dharma in this case, when the great pillar thinking about Dharma in this case refers to our deliberate practice of zealously protecting a mind generation of virtuous thoughts. This requires that we can rest our mind single-pointedly on such a task. Hence, we're dealing here with a crucial meditative technique called concentration. And this is made perhaps more obvious by the Venerable Michael Yeshe's translation of verse 41, moving on. Those who strive by all means for concentration should not wander off for even a moment by thinking, how is my mind behaving? They should closely analyze their mind. And in this way, we arrive at the next subheading, analyzing whether it is singularly, pointedly focused on virtue or not. Again, the meaning is very precise. Gautabje says, I shall not for even one moment lose my concentration on the virtuous object and be distracted by something else. Analyze your mind repeatedly, saying, this mind of mine does suitable and unsuitable actions. Recognizing this mind of mine sometimes does suitable actions and sometimes does unsuitable actions. We need to be able to focus on the suitable actions without distraction and let the others go. So this means that it's imperative we have to know what's going on in our own mind at any particular juncture. If we fail to employ introspection to check up whether our mindfulness of virtuous objects is intact, it is a fact that we will quickly wander off, wander away from the all-important task of generating virtuous thoughts continuously. As Sonam Senmos advises, persevering in this samadhi, which is translated as concentration in Bachelor, means placing one's attention on virtue as opposed to merely practicing calm abiding meditation. The meaning here is that whereas in calm abiding meditation, we deliberately hold a mental or generic image of our chosen object of stabilization, say the image of a Buddha, and maintain awareness of that in an unwavering fashion for as long as we can. In this case, Shantideva's case here, we are focusing on various virtuous objects as they come and go according to our existential circumstances. Things happen. We need to develop the capacity to be able to single-pointedly focus on virtuous objects and allow experience to occur at the same time. So it's not, we don't have to stop the world in its tracks in order to hold one thing, but we have to develop a mind that's able to let things flow while remaining intent on virtue, without getting absorbed or distracted. So Sonam Senmo's contrasting reference to merely, as in merely practicing calm abiding, points to this additional degree of scope or effort required in our current circumstances of training as a bodhisattva. This is related to the fact that our focus is not required to be singly, pointedly focused on just one object. Rather, it must be able to focus on various virtuous objects according to our circumstances, as just explained. This is because what we are being ethically required to do or think in any given situation is entirely our responsibility. It is up to us. Geshe Jumpa Gatso therefore advises, from the very beginning, we have to check again and again if our mind is remaining on its virtuous referent object, one pointedly or not, even if only for a moment, and putting energy into that. We should constantly use our mind to check up whether it has become distracted to some other object so that its virtuous referent has been given up. If we find that the mind is not dwelling on the virtuous referent, vigilance should take hold of the mind and put it back on the object. Thinking about the meaning of emptiness without forgetting it is mindfulness, whereas vigilance is the mind checking whether it is staying on emptiness or not. This is an illustration. If the mind is not staying on the object but has scattered outside, the one is to take hold of the mind and put it back on the object, bringing it back to mindfulness. And this is the process of vigilance. From the point of view of the mind not forgetting the referent and aspect, we speak of mindfulness. And from the point of view of remaining on those objects, we speak of concentration. So we can go into these discussions at more length. But from this explanation in Shantideva, we're being asked to appreciate how mindfulness and concentration are both assisted by vigilance. And it's not the case that we can extract or forget any one of these three. The issue of required creative discernment or engaged appropriate judgment, I've used the word engaged there, is extended into the next verse, which falls under the heading explaining the permitted and forbidden actions, verse 42. But if I'm unable to do this when afraid or involved in celebrations, then I should relax. Like it's been taught that at times of giving, one may be indifferent to certain aspects of moral discipline. This is indeed a intriguing and in some ways thought-provoking stanza. The first main point is quite clear. We are being given, under certain circumstances, permission to relax effort to maintain mindfulness and alertness, as earlier described. The example of a celebration is given. We might think of a festival event, for example. Guilt subject indicates this. But also the example of fear is given, referring to a circumstance or circumstances where we feel really overwhelmed or threatened. To let go, to relax in such circumstances is okay. We can always regroup later. But Shantideva then immediately goes on to give another context in which this yielding to relaxation might prove a suitable response, and he does it to illustrate the point just made. When we are engaged, for example, in the practice of giving, it might be appropriate to be indifferent to certain aspects of moral discipline. We gave the example last week of exactly such a situation wherein we lie to an assailant in order to protect the whereabouts of their quarry, and in this calculated way save the lives of that quarry, prevent them from being speared and killed. This would be an example of the generosity of saving lives. Geshe Jumpa Gapso gives a similar account, but he offers some valuable nuances, which for that reason I'd like to share. When a person has to choose between two actions, the practice of generosity and a fine practice of the practice of morality, where it is not possible to perform both, so that one has to be given up, then one should give up the fine point of morality. Why would that work? Suppose we see a man running past and a bunch of gun-wielding types who are out to kill him. They come up to us and ask if we saw him. If we say we saw him, we will put his life in danger, and our practice of generosity will suffer, because we are supposed to practice three types of generosity, one of which is protecting the lives of others from danger, the generosity of fearlessness. If we say we saw him, that generosity will not have been performed. In such a situation, we should reply, I saw no truly existent person, or I have come from a long distance, or something else similarly irrelevant. They did not ask us if we had come from a long way away. Still, we should reply in such a fashion. So it's throwing out red herrings, trying to get them to forget what they're doing in asking us where the person went. We're trying to waylay them. We can say, I'm in a hurry, or something like that. If they insist further, we should say, I did not see him. Even though we saw him, we should say we did not, because there is a purpose in doing so, and our morality is not harmed because there is permission under such circumstances. By such means, we protect the person from danger. When we say, I did not see him, although saying we did not see when in fact we did is lying, and so it means our morality would normally suffer. But in that case, where mainly we are practicing generosity, the generosity of fearlessness, there is no fault. That is the point being made here. It is not the case that when we are practicing generosity, we are to give up the practice of morality. This is crucial to take on board. Geshe Jumpa Gyatso says, in fact, we should practice all the six perfections in order to ripen our own continuum. Therefore, it would be incorrect to give up morality. So the implication here is that we are temporarily suspending our practice of a fine point of morality, a detail of morality, in order to practice generosity. So the point here is that we can't do both, we have to do one or the other. So the other one drops away into a latent position. So when we're practicing the generosity of giving fearlessness, our morality is still intact, but it's not the prime basis of our operation at that moment. It will be picked up immediately when the time is appropriate at a future date. So Gyaltsabje proceeds to address how such a suspension should be understood. And this is worth quoting at some length as failing to appreciate this very subtle reading might result in mishap or even appear to legitimize lapses in our mode of maintaining conduct, especially that pertaining to our bodies. So Guilt Subject raises the hypothetical query, how can one regard it with equanimity since morality is greater than generosity? It's referring to a situation where we put morality into the background, if you like. And the answer is, one does not divert mentally from the first practice in a series that have to be practiced sequentially. Generosity, which is to be practiced first, is practiced alone with a firm mind for the time being. This is to achieve the proper sequence of the path, because if one mistakes the sequence, then one will not achieve the former or the latter. By knowing and following the stages of the path, the secondary afflictions, which are not introspection and which do not know the sequence, will not increase. Hence, one should strive to become proficient in the sequence of the path. So in other words, we have to know when and when not to do things according to the overall sequence of the path. So clearly then, we are to conduct ourselves according to a full and cohesive view of the entire path, knowing how to traverse its various stages, what to emphasize when. As Guilt Subject indicates, such integrated procedural knowledge itself discombobulates the functioning of the afflictions. This is a really interesting takeaway from this quote, as they are apt to rise up without respect to any path or any cohesive, legitimate sequence of their own. There's no methodology there coherently at all in the afflictions. They just want to carry out their impulsive damage. That's their intent, and that's what they do. There's no great purpose there. There's no demon behind the scenes pulling the strings. It's simply the danger involved in the energy of that afflicted emotion that we have to work with and tackle. So one final point in this regarding this verse, Shantideva is careful to indicate that he is proceeding from scriptural authority in his account of a permissible dispensation, i.e., temporarily suspending moral practice in this case. And this is indicated by the words, like it has been taught, referring to the verse. Such sutric sources are being relied upon. Guilt Subject himself quotes from the sutra requested by Inexhaustible Wisdom, which says, thus, at the time of generosity, contain morality and practice equanimity. Equanimity here might be interpreted as a deliberately neutral state of mind. In his commentary, Guilt Subject includes the next two verses under the same heading, explaining the permitted and forbidden actions. I'll simply read them out today. Verse 43, I should undertake whatever deed I intended to do and think of doing nothing other than it. With my mind applied to that task, I should set about for the time being to accomplish it. And 44, by acting in this way, all will be done well. But by acting otherwise, neither action will be done. Likewise, there will be no increase in the proximate disturbing conceptions that come from a lack of alertness. So we'll move on from there next week. So again, I've covered quite a lot of ground, and you'll notice here how Shantideva is moving very precisely into particular behavioral circumstances, if you like, in order to help us work out how we train in the midst of those situations, in the midst of those experiences. And so these are very, very precious instructions because they open out our practice to 24-hour activity in the most exciting way. So I'll throw it open now to questions or comments or sharing of stories and so forth. And you can come in from a different place if you're wanting to contribute something which hasn't been explicitly discussed today. That's all very good too. So would anyone like to contribute or offer? Stephen, thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Ross. Yeah, just to comment on the last few minutes. And I find it interesting in the trade-off between generosity and morality. When we can't do both, we tend towards generosity. And to me, what I thought of was that in a way, what you're doing is when you're generously telling a lie in order that someone might escape harm, in fact, what you're doing is you're kind of taking it onto yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're rescuing that other person, and then you're dealing with, the morality of telling a fib. And to me, that seems like a very bodhisattva type of attitude. And also, what I thought of as well is generosity is one of the methods a bodhisattva uses in order to gather disciples. So maybe that person would survive and escape his pursuers. And then they might, think upon you like a little bit more positively in the future. So I thought about those two aspects and wondered how you would respond to that.
Well, I'd like to throw it open for everyone to contribute.
Oh, yeah.
These are interesting reflections, aren't they? I do think you're making a very important point, Stephen, about the Bodhisattva's attitude being the main thing there, because it's the Bodhisattva's thinking, even if I was to tell a fib and that was to have negative consequences, even if it was to, I'm going to do it anyway because I'm saving a life. And that is more precious than protecting myself in that circumstance. And so there's a radical revalorization, if you like, of the worthiness of particular objects in that scenario. So the Bodhisattva is automatically thinking of protecting that life as the most precious thing, the most skillful thing to do. It's almost incidental, I think is what it was suggesting, what happens to me as a consequence. Because in the bigger picture, it's not going to matter. Because the Bodhisattva's training, its capacity to perfect the perfection sequentially, starting from generosity in this case, will have been dramatically supported and enhanced. It is also the point, as Gelt Sabde was pointing out, that we perfect generosity before we perfect ethics. And as explained in Chandrakirti and so forth, this means that it's relatively easier to perfect generosity than it is ethics. And therefore, that's also an appropriate reason why we might choose to act in that way at that moment, because by protecting the first perfection, we're then able to reliably and powerfully perfect the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and so forth, leading to full enlightenment. So there's a kind of overall arc there, which is also rendering the situation intelligible and intelligent. I think the great danger of those examples is why I tried to caution it, is that if we do read them superficially, it's as though we can abandon ethics altogether. That's not what's been said. So we're talking about strategy here within a more global awareness of what it is we're attempting to do. So there's extraordinary wisdom in that, because we move from the openness of understanding to the particularity of an emerging circumstance without any problem, because of the way in which we've been working to understand the nature of reality, both conventionally and ultimately through ultimate means as well. So there's sort of a coherency there, which is extraordinary. And that's what I meant earlier when I talked about simplicity. I use that word in a very particular way. It's not as complicated actually at all, because it's so clear what is being done and why. It's liberating, that clarity, because we're no longer being harnessed by and controlled by the delusions. Yeah. So do we find we're able to do some of these things? And what about this example of looking? Have we ever noticed that that's a problem in our lives? Because, I know from my own experience, if I'm secretly harboring a resentment, my friend doesn't know, that's why I'm secret, I can't hide my resentment to my really alert friend, because they know when they look at my face that there's something going on. We do this with our partners. Are you upset with me? What's the matter? We know something's wrong. They know something's wrong, but we haven't told them. So we're exhibiting that in our demeanor, if you like. So I think the psychological resonances here are quite extraordinary, because through modulating our exterior appearance, in this case, our outer manifestation of a body in social space, we're able to also begin working back on mind transformation. This is why His Holiness the Dalai Lama says we must train ourselves to greet everyone we meet with open arms, as though they are the most cherished friend. These are remarkable trainings to begin to explore in our daily lives. So there was a discussion happening before I came on board at the beginning of the session. I think, would you like to bring it up again, and we'll see where it was going, or was it melted away? Thanks.
Unfortunately, it has not melted away.
Oh.
I've been working on that visualization of this ache and this pain in my chest. And I am familiar with that steel rod feeling as well, the I.
Mm-hmm.
This thing in there, if it's not even there, that's the craziness of all of this. There is no I, there is no part other than some strange ego that was very offended by someone the other day who got very personal and rude and mean. And I mean, really poked personal stuff totally out of context, but it was obvious to me they were having jealousy or anger or something, and it comes to me sometimes from this one specific person. There's like these jabs,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm kind of like, wow. And this time the feeling is still there. It's softening. I've been reading Lama Zopa and meditating on emptiness, but I was asking before class, I was like, well, what, besides those things I've been doing, do you have any ideas of how to deal with a situation? Because I'm in contact with this person quite often socially, and I'm uncomfortable, and at this point, with what happened a couple days ago, I don't feel safe around them.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't feel safe. And they do physically like charge up to me, like cornered me now twice. And I'm like, this time I just put my hand out and I said, back off.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to say it twice before they took one small step back.
Mm.
And so this palpable, is it my ego that's still wrestling, or I'm unsure of how to proceed other than continue to breathe and meditate on emptiness and dissolve the ache and the tightness in my chest. So I'm open to listening to anybody's ideas.
I was originally going to suggest something that I've found to be useful, but it sounds like there's a little bit more, but I'll tell you anyways. Normally, if when somebody says something mean, if I can say to them in kind of a loving way, "Are you okay?" Usually it will either open a conversation, or they'll realize that, you know, what they're saying. But if that doesn't work, or if I can't stop that, I call it like this burning, where I hyper focus and I can't think of anything else. The only thing that I have found useful is Medicine Buddha, over and over and over again, over and over and over again, and over and over and over again, almost until I calm. But that, I think in your situation, wisdom would be to avoid. But yeah.
Yes, in that verse of thinking whether to retreat or advance, it's interesting, isn't it, to think about in relation to this. It can be skillful to withdraw. It's as simple as that. So this is to avoid contact. But again, like the example of morality, it's not to avoid that person in terms of abandoning care for them, which would be a forfeiture of one's Bodhisattva precepts, because one's left one sentient being out from enlightenment. May everyone become enlightened except for this one person who I don't like for whatever reason, or they cause trouble. That would be a failure of our Bodhisattva attitude. So in our heart, we care for them, but on a practical, superficial level of daily intercourse, it may be skillful to minimize contact if we can't avoid it altogether. And for that purpose, we can also minimize our engagement content with that person. So say we do have to greet them and say hello, we do so, and we do it with a smile, but we don't pick up any threads that would lead to a more complicated conversation. And if that person is trying to hook us, which they might in fact be doing, by throwing out hooks, that they are trying to get an aspect of our self-cherishing that's going to be work to drag us in. We just watch those hooks and just let them fall off. Our radiant feeling of compassion for this poor troubled person desperately trying to hook another person in. So we don't do that in a patronizing way. We simply observe it happening and do that from a position of strength and calm, which is that Shing image we had in Shantideva, where a giant immovable tree, and that person's trying to tear branches or strip us of leaves. Doesn't matter. We're here. They can't do a thing to shake us. And so that stability can come about through composure in your own mind. And that is the most precious thing, because we're not, as I said at the very beginning of the session, we're not trying to change that person's behavior. We're actually effectively changing our behavior, which means that we become a witness to that person's behavior with an expansive clarity that's hitherto impossible, because we've been trying to squeeze everything back through the apertures of our self-cherishing attitude. It's never going to work. So the Bodhisattva sees clearly what's before them. And so that's what we're training to do. And if the Buddha had given up on everyone who had afflictive emotions, let's look at this world that we're in at the moment, not to mention ourselves. You know, we would be abandoned and left behind by the Buddhas. We don't want that to happen. So neither do we want that person to be abandoned, left behind even by us in future lives. So I personally find great efficacy in Tonlen on the run in these situations. And the person is talking to me, and I'm thinking, may that, through the blessings of my guru, may that person's negative karma ripen upon me right now, and may I give them over all virtues and happiness and place them in a state of great bliss. That's coming from the inside of my mighty tree of intending bodhicitta. There's nothing more precious in that moment than to exchange self and others. Because if we can train ourselves to do that Tonlen practice in that situation, then we're going to be increasingly able to expand our practice in other situations. And so that's why Shantideva and all of our precious teachers say that the most treasured manifestation of the guru is our enemy, because it gives us the opportunity to practice. But not only that, but to measure the failure of the extent of our own practice up to now. It's incredibly valuable, because we can get carried away with ourselves and think, oh, I'm really calm and patient. I've been meditating for 20 years and everyone thinks I'm a Buddhist teacher online and everything. But then I go to the supermarket and get cross with someone who pushes in front of me in a queue. What is going on, Ross? You're not practicing at all. That person is fantastically manifesting for me at that moment. I should be delighted that situation has just occurred, as well as being polite and delighted to let that person have their place in the queue without seeking to regain that territory. So these are really practical ways of doing things. But that Tonlen practice is very, very special, because it's done in secrecy. The other person need not know that's what you're doing with your mind at that moment. But it will position you to appropriately be placed, and also to listen, because it's very difficult to hear what another person's actually saying. I'm talking about deep hearing here, not superficial hearing. When that person's complaining to us about something or whatever they're doing, there's something else going on behind that that's driving them. You're probably less able to see that if you're trying to interact at that surface level of their discourse, if you like, because you're buying into the grammar of their game in this case. And so if you can not get engaged, you can then begin to see that person more clearly, and therefore work out more skillfully whether to come in this way or that way, or indeed whether to walk away, when to walk away as well. And so these are legitimate things to consider. And Geshe Doga is often given the advice of people in extremely disharmonious relationships, but there can be a time when it is necessary to step aside, not to cling to that relationship. I'm not saying this is your case, but just a general example. That can be very, very skillful means indeed, because the other person's not benefiting either.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thanks for sharing. These are very personal things, aren't they? It's always someone's going to manage to fulfill that role for us. So we might conclude there. So thank you very much. We'll do our final prayers as usual, but we do have something to dedicate because we have spent this time contemplating the meaning of Shantideva's profound text. So feel that we give away all the virtues of this for the benefit of others. So I'll do the final prayers. Thank you.
For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the miseries of the world. May all of the pains of living creatures ripen upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings, which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy, be materially supported and honored and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through those kindness, wholesome minds ensue, and prostrate to my spiritual masters through whose kindness I develop. Gewadi dinu Lama Sangye Gune Drowa Chikat Malupa Di Sala Gopa Shob Janchu Semcho Rinpoche Ma Ke Pana Ke Guchi Ke Panam Pa Mi Payang Gon Ne Gondu Per Shob. May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine actions spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Genri, Railway, Korway, Jinkam, Der, Pandak, Dewa, Malu, Jungwe, Na, Chenre, Zigwa, Tenzin, Gatso, Yi, Japas, Seti, Pardu, Tengurchi. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratibuddhikas, victorious Losan, father and sons, together with your lineage, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands. Please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer in holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings. Through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make request. Soul gateway through which all benefits and happiness emerge while striving exclusively for the welfare of the victorious one's teaching and mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. And at this I lost hope. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the 3 jewels and the great waves of the mind generation of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples.
Thank you very much, everyone. I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you,
And have a
Dr.
good day.
Ross.